Awaken the light. The cosmos is within you. Remember who you are.
Hello, my friends. Hello, my friends. Hello, my friends. I can't imagine very many people are going to be here on this phenomenal Saturday, beautiful day here in Atlantic City. I live a block away from the beach, and it's busy at the beach in my morning walk. People are enjoying it. I had this internal driving force to do this live stream today. So here I am. Love lights, I say, welcome all. This is a ACK Essential. Yes, an ACK Ascension Essential live stream. Got that out. It's like a tongue twister. Yeah, let me turn my music down before I get uh, copyright issues on what do you call it? YouTube here. And yes, I'm only streaming on one channel today. I'm not doing the juxtaposition between the live stream and the phone on TikTok because it is a bit much to manage. And I think that this is a very important live stream. So love lights, I say, welcome all. This is an ACK Ascension special. Thank you for being here. And I have to do my housekeeping. My dear friends, I need you to, I would love for you to comment. Definitely like, subscribe, get this work in the algorithm. If you're watching this or watching it later, you know there is something here that others will probably want to hear. And I know there's some sort of thing that happens on YouTube where people come, look at the video, parts of the video, and don't like it. They do not like it, right? Help me out here. You know, the algorithm gets more eyes on this, and it potentially can help and uplift more people. And that is my goal. So definitely please comment, like, subscribe, and hit notifications so you'll know when videos are being uploaded. Yes, I have a schedule, but as you can, and that's on Power Profit TV, you can see it on the banner. When I do special live streams like this, you will be notified so you can either watch it as it's being aired or you can watch it later, my friends. So I'm just really excited, okay? And as you know, I always have my notes to keep me on script because, well, to keep me on point, right? Because, and of course, yeah, to help me out. Somebody asked, what are you reading? Like any professional person who is seeking to do a professional job, yes, there are times to speak off the cuff and to speak true to, you know, what's coming out your mouth in that moment. When you are teaching, as I do, it is critical that all the points are covered. And that is why I read notes, I reference notes, but as many, and I have to address these comments because they make sense. People should ask these things. And as many folks who follow me and watch these live streams know that I may have a script, but I can riff anytime in that script that it's necessary for me to provide more detail, more context, more insight, story, illustration, whatever is necessary. And since I operate in the spirit, I get downloads, right? As I'm speaking. And the downloads don't just come for me to ignore them like so many of us do. I capture the download and I share it because usually somebody needs to hear it that way. And it can also expand and enlighten the point so that it's a little bit more clear and resonant. Okay, so those are my little housekeeping things here. So yeah, my eyes are looking around because what I should do is move this over. I got to rearrange stuff. You know what I mean? No, I'm not going to do it over there. I'm going to try to keep it here. My camera's in a different angle. And I hope I'm looking in the right. I'm looking over here. Does it follow my eyes? These are the simplest little issues, but they are issues nonetheless. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. Wherever you are and however you came in today, you are in the right room. And I need you to settle all the way in, my friends, today, because we are definitely going to take our time together. Okay. This is an extended live stream. It's timed at 90 minutes. And the reason why I did it was because, I want to get all the information out that I can give today in that 90 minutes. Also, it allows me to, chop up the segments and make them into 30-minute videos. But if you want the full effect, because I do edit out a lot of stuff in those 30-minute clips, but if you want the full effect, you will sit with me right here, right now, my friends. Okay? So, like I said, this is not a quick word by any stretch of the imagination. This is a long, deep walk down a road a lot of people were never allowed to walk. And I want us to walk all of it slowly, on purpose, from one end to the other. And also, these discussions garnered a great deal of attention. And in the past clips, I was only, live streams, I just gave a little bit in pieces, right? Because they were so popular in their views. That's another reason why I'm deciding to do this in this way today. So a few weeks ago, from which those clips came from that many have seen on the ancestors and, the history in that way, I stood here and named the oldest war in this country, that this country has ever waged, the war on our memory. And in the middle of that, almost in passing, like I said, I named a few weapons in their arsenal in that war, right? The drum was banned, the gods they called devilry, the Bible they edited, my friends, and handed to the enslaved. And something happened that I have learned never to ignore. So many of you have reached back to me in those few minutes, as I've mentioned. Tell us more about the drum, you said. Tell us more about the gods. Tell us more about that book. Because something in you recognized something, right? That's the beginning piece. Something in you recognized something. Okay? Something in you sat straight up. And after all those years, I know what it is, my friends. When this many of us feel the same pull in the same moment, that is not curiosity, my friends. That is ancestors tapping on the glass. And give me a second while I check on YouTube just to make sure. A lot of these videos have been coming out a little blurry. I don't want that. Actually, I should put this up on my screen TV. Yes, I am clean and clear here. Okay, looking groovy, my friends. I'm gonna keep this up here. I should put it. Oh, and I also want to shout out. We're at 95 subscribers on YouTube. And all because of this Ascension series. And so I'm not going to say anything yet until, So I will be back with fireworks and celebration for the hard work that I've put in, that you've seen, and which you are sharing through your desire to subscribe. Okay. So when this many of us feel the same pull at the same moment, my friends, that is not curiosity. That is the ancestors tapping on the glass. So today we answer them, right? And that's that intuition, that's that calling, that knowing that all of us have and we ignore. I don't ignore. And sometimes that intuition and calling does not come from inside myself. Sometimes it is driven by what I'm observing on these social media feeds in regards to interactions with this work, right? Um, Everything is a message, a communication from ancestors, from my spirit guides, right? And so it's important that we listen. So today we go all the way in. My name is Minister Dr. Akila Kamaat, and this is an Oct Ascension special live stream. Now, let me give you the truth, all right, that is going to hold this whole 90 minutes together, my friends. And I want you to write it in your heart, before we take a single step. The people, I'm looking over here at the, the screen. I need to put this over here because I'm doing some, you know what? I'm gonna put this over here. Yeah, I got to experiment with these. What do you call it? These the arrangement of these screens. So give me a second. I'll edit this out. I'm gonna put this over here. So I'm not looking crazy. All right. Or maybe I am. I just cannot tell. Local recording disabled. Oh, I'll keep it over here. No, this stuff is so simple. If I was smart, I'd be dealing with this stuff before I come on. But all right. Hopefully that is it. I'm just not going to look at the screen. I'm going to look where I feel it's important to look. Now, let me give you the truth that is going to hold this whole 90 minutes together, my friends. And I want you to write it on your heart before we take a single step. The people who enslaved our ancestors were not fools, my friends, by no stretch of the imagination. They were not fools. They were extraordinarily cruel, but they were not stupid. And it is dangerous to imagine that they were, because they understood something about us that we, in our long forgetting, right, were trained, my friends, to forget about ourselves. All right. They understood that what we were dealing with was not simply a people to be worked. It was a technology, a spiritual technology. They looked at the African and they saw a person who could speak to the dead through the skin of a drum, who carried a whole cosmology of the divine self in the very way they moved through the world, and who held their identity and their destiny inside a single sacred name, and who understood the spoken word itself, my friends, as a force. They understood it as a force, okay, that could bend reality, and they were afraid of it. They were afraid of every bit of it. And you know, these anthropologists, these ethnographists, people who do ethnographies, these people coming in to sort of assess the scene, were coming in way before slavery started, and then throughout slavery, and they were gathering information on how powerful we were. I've mentioned several times about the Dogon tribe and their capacity to map the stars right before who was it, Galileo even invented the telescope, right? They understood this. They understood some practices. I mean, they saw these things. They studied them. They wrote about them. And then they buried them from us, us here. We African Americans, right? And they buried it from us. And so this is why I'm getting into this. It's insane how in their cruelty and their abject narcissism, that they captured all this body of knowledge, not to share, but to exploit, brutalize, and infantilize. Yes, to make it seem like we were babies to be kept not in a crawl, Kraal, like we lived or folks live in many parts of Africa now, but back in the day, these areas where there were homes in the way that there were homes in this enclosed area called a crawl, right? So they took that crawl and turned it into a plantation with slave quarters on it. And, I have been having this thought for a long time. I'm just going to share it like right here and now about how, people left England and other places. And I'm not discounting all the indigenous peoples that were here. Okay. That's not my conversation. I'm talking about the white Europeans that came here. And yes, there were black folks in Europe who came here as well. But the white Europeans who came here to escape tyranny, a king, but yet when they came here, they set up little kingdoms called plantations, right? And they did not build castles because maybe that was just not practical, but they had people's slaves build these huge mansions that were akin to a castle, the master's house, the king's castle. And then for serfs, as they were in England, so they set themselves up, the man, patriarchal, as the king, the master of his realm, right? And then they set up a serfdom, the land for the serfs, the areas that were supposed to be, what do you call it? Farmed to reap the ground for the king. And of course, those serfs gave everything to that king, and they were taxed heavily, and they really had nothing, these serfs. So they replicated that same serf structure on these plantations, these many kingdoms that they ruled with an iron hand, meted out punishment, much with the same cruelty that the English king was doing, right? The persecution, but they refined the system such that, or maybe not such that, slaves had nothing. They were given scraps. At least the serfs, from my research, could have kept some of the goodies, the vegetables, the onions, the potatoes, perhaps. A one-to-one correlation here, right? They came here and set up, they even had the British flag, which of course had the X with like the cross in the middle. These people took that flag, took the cross out, and kept the X, the Confederate flag. So just food for thought there. Just food for thought there. That's all that is, right? And so they knew what Africans could do, Kim peoples could do, and they were absolutely afraid of it because never in their wildest dreams or imagination could they do anything as powerful as Kim peoples. All right. So not only did they chain the body, okay, hear that. They set out deliberately and strategically to dismantle the technology or technologies, to cut the wires, right? To reach in and unplug folks from the source of their own power. Okay? And that is the crime we are going to trace today all the way down. And then I'm going to show you that it didn't work, as I talked about before. I may not sit in how it didn't work for long, but I just want to reiterate and remind people, again, this is a special that extends our discussion of the Ka, the bloodline, that is up now on Power Profit TV. This is an extension of that. Okay. So here's where we're going. And if you're still here, like, the video, subscribe, hit notifications. So here's where we're going so that not one of us gets lost along the way. First, we're going to talk about the name they took from you, right? And the name they put in its place, because that was the very first cut. Then the drum they banned, and how the rhythm refused to die, and exactly where it went to hide. Then the gods they exiled, and I'm going to show you where they have been waiting for you this whole time, my friends. Then the book they edited, and how our people freed, the word anyway. I'm not going to get all the way into the Bible because it is to me just a book. But it has served many, many people well, I should say, even myself for a time. So this is not going to be a deep dive into what they cut out the Bible. But I do want to talk about the special Bible they created for slaves. Okay. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about the part that matters most of all, and what all of this, right, did to us. I think it's important to do that down to the soul, my friends. And while remembering it is not a history lesson, and I'm not trying to beat anybody over the head with this, you listen, you don't, you don't. You know, it is a spiritual homecoming, and I'm going to show you where that homecoming happens and why you were never meant to make it alone, my friends. Okay? So they did not come for these four things because they were trinkets. No, they didn't. Not at all. They came for them, my friend, because these things were powerful. Kim power, melanin power. So let us together go and take our power back. And for some, even if it is just in this live stream. Okay. So first, we begin with the name. Okay, because the name is where they began. Well, first of all, they ripped us out, right? They ripped us away. They ripped us out of the homeland. All right. Excuse me, I put my phone on, do not disturb. They ripped us out of the homeland. That was first, away from our peoples, away from all that we knew, could see, understood. That was a cosmological, ontological, epistemological, I should say, trauma, erasure. Not even an erasure, but can you imagine the trauma? Can you imagine? Many people go to Africa, to some of the slave ports, and they speak about how their life was changed. They couldn't stop crying. I mean, it's powerful. I mean, I've been to plantations in South Carolina and North Carolina, and looked at some of these spaces, and it is powerful indeed, right? And no, I did not go with a tourist person that showed me stuff. Most of the plantations I went to, I was able to explore, probably under surveillance, but with the people I went with, explore without having somebody tell me what was happening. I'd rather read, walk, and sit in my intuition and in communication with my ancestors in these places, so that I gain a much more expansive insight, psychically, spiritually, intuitively, than what somebody blah, 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 blah has to say. I mean, I like that too. But anyway, so I have to take a minute to tell you what a name actually was to your ancestors, because it was nothing like what a name is to most of us today, although things are changing. For us, a name is often just a sound our parents liked, like my original name, Jennifer. right? I appreciate that name very much so. It is not my spiritual name. Um, Although I would say yes, a layer of the spiritual name. Okay. Um, but it was the top in the top 8 names of the time, like Jennifer and Heather and Stephanie. There are many people from my time named Jennifer, Heather, and Stephanie. You know, um, give me a second here. I want to look up something. Give me a second. Something came to my mind, and that was the Akashic records, and I'll get a little bit into that. Right, I had some notes on my phone um, that I wanted to bring up because um, not only is the Akashic records important for discerning who you are, it's also important for your name. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Um, and so, for us, a name is often just a sound our parents like I said, Jennifer. Okay, a pretty word off a list, but clearly, our parents thought that that was who we were when they named us. But in the cultures our people came from, and there are traditions down south where they call in a elder, a woman who has a knowing, and that person names the child. So a lot of these traditions that are steeped or move over here from Africa may not necessarily be the exact same. They can be the exact same, but they operate in a similar way. A woman comes in and names a child, and sometimes it's not even immediately at birth. I mean, we get pushed into believing we got to name the kid at birth, right? Instead of giving a moment, right? So anyway, that's a tradition I learned about down south from actually a client. She was calling for a psychic read, and she mentioned her name, and it was very interesting name, and she told me who gave it to her. We discussed a little bit about the practice that led to this naming ceremony. Okay, so a name is a whole sentence spoken over a life, all right? It could tell you the day you were born and the circumstances of your birth. It could tell you which ancestor had come back around and was living in you again. It carried your lineage, the entire line you belong to, folded into a few syllables, my friends. And sometimes it could be a lot of syllables, but folded into those nonetheless. It could carry a destiny, a prayer your family speaking over you your whole life, every single time they called you in from the yard for supper, right? Among so many of our peoples, when a child came, as I said, there was a naming ceremony, a sacred day, an event, because to give a name was to speak a soul into its rightful place in the world. I named my child after Cairo, Egypt, because it had such a central place, you know, uh, in my growth as a spiritual being. Egypt, period. Right? Um, so every time I say it, it means a great deal. Okay. So to know your name was to know exactly whose you were. And my son was never mine. That's another reason. I was the vessel, the channel through which this divine precious spirit came into being in the corporal form. But he was never mine. I love him dearly, respect him dearly, care for him dearly, but he was never mine. Think about that. So, So to know your name is to know exactly who you were and exactly where you came from. And I want you to feel the weight of that, right? Even as I spoke it about my son. Your name was not a label. Your name was your address in the universe. It located you. It told you and everyone who spoke it that you were a somebody who came from a long line of somebodies. So yes, my son's first name is after Cairo, Egypt, but his two middle names are from ancestors. He was never mine. Okay. And so, in the very stream system I'm teaching you in this ascension, this is one of the 9 bodies of light. It is the 4th. We call it the Ren, which I haven't gotten to yet, but I just want to bring that into view here. The true name, the word power of your identity, my friends. The ancients of the Nile taught you, or actually taught, that to speak a person's name was to make them live, and to blot out their name was like a second kind of death, a deeper death than the death of a body. Okay, our ancestors across the continent knew that same truth in their bones. The name is sacred, the name is life, my friends. So now, with all of that in your heart, I need you to see what uh, white folks did, right? Caucasians, what they did, they stole your ancestors when they marched you in chains to the coast and held and held your ancestors, held Africans in pens they called barracoons, and packed them into the bellies of the ships, and finally stood them up on the auction blocks like animals for sale. One of the very first things they did before the work, before the whip, was to take their name. And I did say, I mentioned roots, because we see Kunta Kinte refusing to take the name of Toby and being whipped for it. And Roots was nice. The brutality visited upon Africans in America, unimaginable. I mean, as you've seen, the hangings, the cutting off of genitalia, I mean, eating of human parts. I mean, to even think about it, I think your head, to even know about it, understand it, your head would explode. I mean, seriously, like that skit in Dave Chappelle when when the blind KKK man takes off his hood and they see he's black, that man's head explodes. That's what I'm talking about. So, Caucasians, and I know people are like, why do you keep talking about this? Why do you keep talking about this? We don't talk about slavery enough. That's the problem. We don't talk about it enough. We don't talk about the nitty, the gritty enough, because that is the root of everything that is wrong in this society. We put it in books. Nobody reads it, especially those Black folks who need to read it because they think we're beyond that, which of course is a wonderful job Caucasians have done on people, believing it doesn't matter in this day and age, when in fact it is the whole matter of this day and age. So they stripped the sacred name of your ancestors' own that your ancestors' own mother had spoken over them in the naming ceremony, and in its place they assigned a new one, like they do in prison when they assign you a number, chosen by a stranger who owned them, owned Kim Peoples, owned human beings. And people say slavery was everywhere. Granted, nobody did slavery like Caucasians did in the United States of Americans. Often, the name they gave was the surname of the man who bought them. Can you imagine the name of the person that just destroyed everything in your whole world? You now having to take on the name of this person. And that was so that a human being was made into a possession in the very sound of what they were called. Made into a possession in the very sound that they were called. Sometimes it was a mocking name, a Caesar, a Pompey, a little classical joke in a language the person didn't even speak. A cruelty wearing the costume of a name, my friends. And just like that, in a single word, the thread was cut. The address in the universe was burned superficially. But over time, it was burnt. Because you can change the person's name, but it's hard to change what's in their head and what they know about their body. It's a little hard. You can, as they did, try to brutalize, beat, kill it out. But Harriet Tubman wasn't running slaves across the country because it was cut out. And Sojourner Truth didn't say, "Ain't I a woman?" because it was completely erased. And the countless others. So, so the address in the universe that came with the name was burnt. A person who had known all their life exactly whose they were and who they were was made on purpose into someone who no longer knew. And I need you to notice how early in the process this happens, my friends, because it tells you everything about what they understood, right? The name was one of the first things to go. Think about it hard about what that means. So they named before they whipped. And if there was a problem, then they will whip the bejesus out of somebody to get them to be named or to accept that name. They could ignore that name. They would not come. They named first. And think about what this means. It means they knew that the deepest chain was never the iron on the wrist, the deepest. The deepest chain was a severing of a person from their own line. Because a person who still knows their name, okay? A person who still knows their name, who can still feel the great line of ancestors standing solidly behind them and with them, is a person who knows they are somebody. And a person, even today, a person who knows all the way down that they are somebody is nearly impossible to enslave in the spirit. You know, as they did bind their hands, you cannot bind the sense of who they are, right? So that came first, the name. The name was the deeper weapon in this discussion that I'm having with you now. And this, my friend, is the exact place the orphan was manufactured, right? The orphan. Africans became orphans. They were kidnapped, orphaned. This is the beginning of the deficit story. It's also the beginning of health disparities, believe it or not. I put on my little academic hat there. So this is the beginning of the deficit story, that quiet, corrosive lie that many of us carried our whole lives without even giving it a second thought. You know what I mean? Not even knowing where we picked that up. A lot of this stuff we do, we don't even know where we picked it up. The feeling that we come from nowhere, that our line just starts with us. And that is like, we've gotten used to it because people hear like that rugged individualist, that individualism ideology. But when you sit and think of it, and then when you understand how to practice the calling of names and sitting with your ancestors, you realize that that was some messed up stuff. That was a messed up, seriously challenging way. It was a crime. Period. It's a crime. The feeling may come from nowhere, that everything starts with us, and that everything else is a fall, which many Black Americans sit in. I want you to hear this clearly, though, because I thought about this, and it may set something down for you today, okay? The feeling is not the truth about you. That feeling is not the truth. That feeling is the residue of that crime. It was installed. This is my social science hat. It was installed deliberately at the auction block when they bought that slave with the taking of a name. And you better believe the people that put them on the auction block did not know their names either. You were not born an orphan. You do not have to ascribe to this rugged individualist, I'm here by myself, I pull myself up by my bootstraps, in parentheses, if you have them, if you have some boots. That is such a misnomer and does such a justice to the power of your kin, my friends. You were not born an orphan. You were engineered to feel like one. That's why we get so caught up with I'm Indian, the Black people here, the Indians in America, before there were Indians here, there were Africans. So, yes, you were engineered to feel like one and to set yourself up as being something rooted in something that could possibly be part of your heritage, but it's not the root, because your root is African. An African. The whole root of the entire world is African. And if you keep saying you're not, that's just, it's sad. It really is. I could say I'm part Lenape Indian because my mother is part Lenape Indian, right? I know this. There were Indians here in New Jersey, okay? But I know that. I don't claim it per se, but I follow some of those traditions, spiritual traditions, because she taught them to me from her grandmother and aunts and so forth. But I'm also a child of Africa. And so I lean toward that very powerfully because my walk in this world was not as a Lenape Indian. It was as a Kim woman. So, listen, because even here, even at the very first cut, they did not fully win, as I shared, because our people hid what Caucasians could not carry. Oh, excuse me. Can't even understand what I'm writing here. Our people hid what they could not carry in the open, all right? In the quarters, away from the ears of the overseer. They spoke their names. In the dark, where the master did not go, the old names were still whispered. Mothers and fathers still leaned down over their children in the night and told them the name of their grandmother, the name of their homeland, the name of the people across the water. Names, D-A-Y, names survived. Names tied to the day of the week a child was born. So day names survived the whole crossing. Names tied to the day of the week a child was born. Kwazi and Kofi and Kwame and Afua, and we all know Queen Afua, who do this work, and many of their cousins showing up in the records again and again and again. Stubborn little seeds of the mother tongue, my friends, that the machine could never quite stamp out of the ground. And children were named, they were named, my friends, for the ancestors quietly, so that the line, in the line, and so the line could keep speaking itself forward through time, one whisper at a time. There are a lot of African-centric names here in America, and they've been denigrated. But you see how that works. Trying to recapture the spirit of that naming, and then the names are denigrated. And many folks that come up, they have these names on their resume, they can't find jobs. If it's not one thing, it's another thing, my friends. All right. And so in our day, people have taken up this reclamation with joy. As I said, choosing African names, giving our children African names that means something again. Standing unashamed in the fullness of a name that once more declares whose we are and who we are. And in this work, we reclaim the Ren, which is going to be coming up soon. And I will be talking about the Akashic records in that, because it is an energetic, for those of you who don't know, the Akashic records is an energetic library, actually a cosmic database that holds the record of every soul's past, present, and future experiences, thoughts, and intents. Okay? I think it's important to know that. Just like the new Wakanda movie coming out, it's all about spirit and conjure, ritual, and knowing, which is very, very important, okay? Because it reminds us that our knowing is not book-centric, Caucasian situated, American. What we can see and feel is what we know. In African civilization and even in Native American tradition, the spirit realm, that level of communication took precedence. It took precedence. And now we see that it's been denigrated. The practice still happens, and we'll talk about that, those spiritual practices a little. But it's interesting how that level of insight and understanding took precedence over everything else. But here in America, it's seen as the purview of religion, which is a bastardization of everything spiritual. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry. So, and in this work, in the Ascension, we reclaim the Ren, the true name as a living spiritual power, hence my spiritual name, Akila Ka Ma'at. I did not give this to myself. It was given to me, again, in that spiritual communication with something greater than what is in this world. And that is the gate that is going to come up on this path. Because to take your name back in whatever way that comes to you is to reach all the way back across everything we did and grab hold of the very thought thread they tried to cut. Okay? It is to stand up in your own life and say, you did not erase me. Excuse me. Here I am. And I know, again, whose I am. And I remember when I decided to, I haven't changed my name officially because I don't need to. But I'll let Jennifer work for government and Akila work for spirit. Okay. And so, because they can't touch that. And so I remember when I decided to begin to use this in the workplace, right? After my experiences, I decided I need some armor. So Akala Kama'at became armor. And I remember struggling with people uh, about using my name because in academia, they want to call me Akila. They wanted to call me Look, I didn't want them having nothing to do with what my mama gave me, right? And so I definitely didn't want to have them anything to do with what the spirit gave me. So I insisted people call me Dr. Ma'at because in that is the goddess, right? To remind me, but more than anything, to 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 embed within their imagination, in their psyche, the power that I walk with, walk in, walk as. Boundaries, you got to have them with Caucasians because they'll try to turn you into whatever they want to turn you into. Jen. Don't call me Jen. Don't call me Jenny. Even when I was using that word, you call me Jennifer. As a matter of fact, don't call me Jennifer. You call me Dr. Warren. Oh, but we're so informal. Yeah, it's informal to you. But to me, it's not informal. This is a professional work setting. So let's talk the drum. Talk the drum. Because, excuse me, because all of, I should have got some water, because all of the views on that particular clip, the spirit was saying, talk about the drum, my sister. Because you asked me to, and because I am an instrument of the cosmos, the divine intelligence. And I go where I'm needed. And because I will be honest with you, I have been waiting all week to do this. All right. The first thing I have to do is to take the drum out of the little box the modern world has placed it in. That's the first thing we got to do. When most people today hear the word drum, they think about a kick drum, a snare, and whatever else goes on that stand, right? They think entertainment, a beat, something in the background, but that keeps the movement of the music because the drum sets the beat. It sets the tone. The drum is the base of the music. And I need you to set that down, the idea of it being something in the background. I need you to set that down for a few minutes completely because it is not remotely what the drum was to your ancestors, my friends. The drum was technology. Rivaling the telephone, the telegram, even before white folks could communicate over distances, Africans had the drum. The drum was one of the most sophisticated communication and spiritual instruments on the face of this earth. Let's say it again. Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. The drum is one of the most sophisticated communication and spiritual instruments on the face of the entire earth. Let me show you, give you some examples, all right? So in much of West Africa, the languages were tonal, which means that the pitch of the word is part of its very meaning. How you say something, sort of like when we have a sentence with a question mark compared to an exclamation point, compared to a period, right? It means the pitch. I'm coming, right? I don't know, tonality, right? Do you know what this means, right? is part, but ours is a whole damn sentence. Forget the pitch in a word. The pitch of a word is part of its very meaning of the word. So that the same, and yes, we have syllables. This is a little bit different. So that the same syllables in a different pitch is different. We have syllables, right? And that syllable is inflexible. That accent. You can't change in American language, you can't put that accent somewhere else. It's stuck. So, in West Africa, the same syllable at a different pitch is a different word entirely. And so America, English has no, it's not creative in any way, shape, or form. It's even the Queen's English, American English, is completely devoid of absolutely any nuance, creativity, no dance, nothing special. Utilitarian. That's what it is. That's what it is. No secrets behind it. Nothing. I mean, Black folks take it and do wonders. Look at Eminem. He's not Black, but he's just phenomenal, right? He plays with that. And then spoken word artists do too, right? So there are folks that understand that dance of the word and the syllables and the accents and all that good stuff. So I don't want to say nothing's happening here, but the English language is very inflexible and rigid. So our ancestors built drums, right, that could bend and slide their pitch, unlike, well, the drums we have nowadays are based off of those, but this is deep. Like the language with the tones, the drums could bend and slide their pitch. The ones we call the talking drums, right? And with them, a skilled drummer could literally speak. They could send a sound of an actual sentence out across miles and miles and miles, from one village to the next, and so on, faster than a man could run. A whole language riding on rhythm through the open air. That's powerful. The drum was the wire. It was the long distance line. Centuries before there was a single wire strung anywhere on this planet, and definitely anywhere here in a place we call United States of Americans. The drum was the keeper of time. It was the great heartbeat, my friends, that held an entire community together in one shared rhythm. At the harvest and the wedding and the funeral and the naming, so that a whole people moved and breathed as one body. And the drum was sacred, holy, set apart. I mean, I used to date my child's father, used to play djembe, and he's the only man who could play it. He would not let me touch that drum. I respected him, right? Sacred, holy, set apart. Only he could touch it. And women did not touch the djembe. In ceremony, the drum was how you called the ancestors and the spirits into the room. The right rhythm in the right hands at the right time could carry a person up and out of ordinary waking consciousness, my friends, and swing open the door between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The drum was a summons. The drum was prayer with a pulse. The drum was the ancestors still speaking out loud in the presence. And you know, I listen to drums, tribal drums, African drums, just the drums a lot. And it was something I did. I didn't understand why. And then after, growing and in this Kim awakening and in Melanin metaphysics, it just made sense to me. It was part of my soul. I use the drums in rituals. I don't play them, but I have tracks. And they do summons, and they are key in rituals and speaking with the dead. And they're powerful. This is some of the stuff we talk about in the temple, these strategies and techniques that have gone to sleep and that many spiritual teachers don't even really know about, especially if they're not Kim, Black. And yeah, period. So, my friend, I want you to hear the fear as Caucasians understood it in regards to the drum. In the year, and I did talk about this a little bit, but I just want to explain a little bit more. In 1739, in the colony of South Carolina, right, there was an uprising. History remembers it as the Stono, Stono Rebellion. A group of enslaved rose up and set out to march from their South toward freedom. Physical freedom. And as they went, they carried drums. And they beat those drums to call others out of the fields and onto the road with them. And the powers of that colony saw something in that moment. Those Caucasians saw something that terrified them to their soul, down to the ground. They saw that the drum could gather people. You would think that they would have known this from all their studies of us before they kidnapped us. But of course, they only see what they want to see. And they could not, right? So they saw the drum could carry a message that they themselves could not read and could not stop and could not even hear coming, right? And so the very next year in 1740, they passed a law. They called it the Negro Act. There was a lot more in that, but that was a law. And among its cruelties, it reached out and outlawed the drum. It made the drum illegal. They made the drum illegal. Just the idiocy. Even though they were smart, these people, I mean, to some level, it's idiotic. And I want you to sit with how strange that is on the face, because that's idiotic, right? A whole colony of armed and powerful men sat down together and wrote a law against a musical instrument. You do not do that over entertainment, my friend. You do not marshal the whole force of the state against, oh my goodness, give me a second. I forgot to do something very important. But you do not marshal, a whole state, right, to stop something like the drum if you're not concerned about its power. It is insanity. Give me a second here. I'm always forgetting this. And I know this is Saturday, and I probably should be a little bit more relaxed. I don't know if I can ever be relaxed in these discussions because they are so critically important. But I don't know how many of y'all use these money transfer systems, but sometimes you gotta get your money out right away because people will get into these and siphon away your money as soon as you get it. And yes, I got paid a little. from my 850,000 jobs that I have. So, you do not pass a law against a musical instrument over entertainment, right? You do not marshal the state, the force of the state to do that against a background beat. Okay. Uh, you only do that when you come to the understanding with real fear that the thing in those hands is a weapon and a wire and a way that African peoples, the enslaved peoples, and the ancestors could still speak. They did not ban the drum because it was loud. Oh, they're making so much noise out there. Tell them to turn that down. No. They banned the drum because it was language. Okay? It was language, it was memory, and it was power more than anything else. And Caucasian enslavers came to know that and understand that very clearly. And here is where, I want you to look at the band through the eyes of Kim metaphysics, Melanin metaphysics. Rhythm is frequency, it is vibration moving through the air and moving through the body, right? Your body, your Kim, your melanin is a receiver of frequency. It has always been that way forever, my friends. As I'm telling you, it is in us. All right. It so when they banned the drum, what they were really reaching for was the antenna. They may not have actually known that, but that's exactly what they were doing. They were trying to jam the Kim signal. They were trying to cut off the frequency that tuned a people to one another and to their ancestors and to the divine, my friends. That is how deep the drum band actually goes. It was never about the noise, it was about the frequency, the vibration, the energetic signal. But you cannot outlaw a heartbeat. And we talked about this with the ib. Okay. And this right here is where I fall in love with our people, African peoples, all over again, African American peoples, all over again, every time I tell it. Because when they took the instrument out of our hands, our ancestors did the most extraordinary thing that any people has ever done with a loss. They became the instrument. Do you? Okay, I'm gonna say it one more time. When they took the instrument out of our hands, our ancestors did the most extraordinary thing that any people has ever done with a loss. They themselves became the instrument. So let me just share with you a little bit about Patty Juba. And I have a friend who calls himself Papa Juby. Now that name is making a little bit more sense to me. Well, he was a friend years ago. Let me teach you Patty Juba all the way because it deserves to be known. When the drum was banned, right, the rhythm did not die and it didn't hide for a very long time. It moved straight into the body. Our people learned to make complex, layered, breathtaking percussion out of nothing at all but themselves. Clapping hands in intricate patterns, we do in church. I don't even want to do it, but they slap their open palms against their sides, against their thighs and their chests. They stomped, they shuffled and slid their feet against the ground and sandman on the sand. They patted their own cheeks and shoulders to change the pitch and the tone. And they stacked all of it together, one rhythm riding on top of another, fast and syncopated and alive, right? until the human body itself became a full drum. And no law on this earth could confiscate it, although they could kill you, hang you, cut off your hands, cut off your feet. But you cannot arrest a person's own two hands. They could not arrest just our hands. They might brutalize and deform them, but they can't arrest them. This practice was called patting Juba, and it lived alongside the Juba dance. And I should have had some videos of this. JUBA, check it out. A competitive, joyful, dazzling movement where one person would keep the beat going on a body while another danced it out in a ring. And voices would lay call and response chanting over the top of it. The Juba dance, JUBA. It survived most powerfully in places like the Sea Islands of Georgia and the Sea Islands, SEA. Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina, where our people managed to hold on to so much of home. And it produced dancers of such pure genius that one of them, a young Black man named William Henry Lane, became so celebrated in the 1840s, dancing rings around everyone who dared to step to him. Dance battle. That the world called him Master Juba. And to this day, he is remembered as one of the founding fathers of American dance. I bet you didn't know that. From a band drum, from the refusing body of a stolen people. And do you know where that rhythm traveled from there? I mean, I'm sure you know it. It went everywhere. It conquered everything. Patting Juba runs straight into the ham bone. Ham bone, have you heard? That same body slapping rhythm handed down on the front porches and playgrounds. They even try to do ham bone, ham bone. That's the only thing we know. Ham bone, have you heard? I remember doing that. Handed down on front porches and playgrounds. It runs into the ring shout, that sacred clockwise circle where our people worship with their whole bodies, the feet sliding, but never crossing, the floorboards themselves becoming the drum. They were forbidden. It runs into the hand clamps and the foot stomps that rock the Black church to its foundation on Sundays and other days. It runs into tap dance. It runs into the deep Black beat of the blues, which I love, and the swing of jazz, which I love that this whole country calls its own. She reminds me of Sinners, right? The movie Sinners. The way in which they displayed the juxtaposition of all the different traditions through which the blues still take shape, has taken shape through, and still take shape. And it runs all the way down into the beatboxing. Remember Bismarcky and others. And the body percussion of our young people right now in this generation, who are still, whether they know it or not, many times they do not know that they're keeping the ancestors' rhythm alive in their bodies. So think about what actually happened here. They banned the drum in 1740 to silence a people, your ancestors. And the rhythm they tried to kill did not merely survive. Mm-mm. It got up out the grave they dug for it and conquered an entire planet. That's the power of kin, the power of melanin. And there's not one corner of the earth today that is not moving, whether it has any idea or not, to the beat of that stolen, silenced, and supposedly powerless activity that people, kept alive with nothing but their hands and their feet and their own refusal to stop, whether they knew it was refusal or not. That is not survival. That is victory, triumphantness. That is power. That is the ancestors having the last word on every dance floor in the world. So we're going into the gods. Okay. Like I said, this is an in-depth deep dive here. In-depth deep dive. And now we come to the gods. And I'm going to walk very carefully here and very lovingly through this part because this is sacred ground. And it has been slandered and misrepresented for a very long time. And I mean to set it straight. Now, I also want to say again, like I always say, these discussions come from my own research, my own work, my own understanding, my own intuition, my own spiritual downloads. Okay. As, yeah, my own perspective. There are probably many more. So I'm not claiming this is the truth. It is a perspective, okay, of truth. But it is true. Look, when Caucasians spoke of the African gods, they wanted you to picture something crude and dark and like as some primitive superstition, idols and devilment. Okay. And I have to correct that completely because that lie did tremendous damage to how we see our own ancestors. What our people carried across that water was not superstition. It was cosmology. It was a vast, sophisticated, deeply coherent way of understanding the universe. And this is the histories of Africa, period. Okay? Not just right before they kidnapped us, but the beginnings of African civilization. It was a vast, sophisticated way of understanding the universe and the self and the sacred. And in many ways, it was more whole, more connected, and more sane than what was forced upon them in its place. Okay? So let me give you just a glimpse of the richness of it, enough to feel the size of what they tried to take. There were the Yoruba with the Orisha and a great family of divine powers, each one a face of the one source and a force of nature, a profound understanding that the single God pours itself out into many powers so that we can know the divine. And there were the peoples of the Homi and the Vodou. There was the Congo cosmology with its cosmogram, a sacred sign of the whole circle of life. The sun that rises and sets and rises again, birth and death and rebirth, turning like a wheel and a crossroads where the land of the living touches the land of the dead, and the great water that stands as the boundary between two worlds. There was also Egyptian spirituality with Ma'at and the many gods higher gods and lower gods, the Hepkas and the and Ma'at is a large. I mean, these were also spiritual traditions of self, of cosmology, and the self, right? And of the whole of Ma'at, Anubis, weighing the feather. These were things that were believed. Okay, so all of Africa, all these gods. So, and running through many of these traditions were the same deep threads that the ancestors are not gone and finished, but present and near and invested in your life. The divine is alive in a river and the tree and the community and in your own body. And you are not a lonely separate speck, but a living part of a sacred whole. It is the truth that the Bantu peoples name with one word, Ubuntu. I am because we are. That, my friend, is not idol worship, as religion would say it is. That was never idol worship. That is a complete metaphysics of connection, a way of seeing that stood over every person and told them every single day of their lives, you are divine, you are accompanied, and you belong to something vast. And that is exactly, precisely why that had to be destroyed. Because think it through with me. You cannot fully enslave a person who knows all the way down in the marrow of their bones that they are divine, that their ancestors, are walking right beside them, and that they are a sacred part of a living whole. A cosmology that is armor for the soul. It is a fortress those folks cannot breach with any whip. So the enslavers understood that it was not enough to chain the body, change the name, and ban the drum. They had to come for the way of seeing itself. They had to reach into the mind and pull out the entire lens. So they condemned the ancestral practices as devilry and heathenism and witchcraft. They forced conversion, which people just walk into today. They labored deliberately and systematically to strip the mother spirituality out of our people and to remake them in the image of the enslaver's God, a God they had to carefully edit, as we are about to see. And people are still sitting in the image of the enslaver's God and get mad when you say anything about it. That is how deep they have been captured. And because of people cut off from their own gods and taught to see the sacred only through the eyes of the ones who own them, is a people far, far easier to hold. But now, because, but now listen, because I'm going to share one of the greatest, most beautiful secrets in our long history. You know, they did not manage to banish the gods. I mean, they only managed to drive them underground. And underground, my friend, is exactly where seeds do their very best work. Okay. Our ancestors were too wise and too devoted and too deeply rooted to simply just let all of that go. Right. So they hid it like so many things. That's why Black folks today don't think anything relates to them, because this is hidden knowledge. And they believe that the American way is the right way only because this information's been hidden from them. Some have found it, but many are still sitting in the Caucasian cage. They hid the whole cosmology inside the new spirituality, right? Or religion, right in plain sight. And in the one place the master would never think to look, inside his own church. In Haiti, the voodoo of Dahomey became voodoo. And the spirits, the Iwa, were severed and honored behind the painted faces of Catholic saints. In Cuba, the Orisha of the Yoruba became Santeria, which is also called Lukumi and Yamaya and Shango and Elegua stood quietly behind Our Lady and Saint Barbara and Saint Anthony, so that a person kneeling in apparent devotion before a saint might truly be greeting an Orisha they had loved for thousands of years. In Brazil, it became, and I don't want to mess this up, Candomblé. And here in the United States, it went down into hoodoo and root work and conjure into the deep wisdom of roots, herbs, and signs and water. And it went into the ring shout. And it went into what scholars have called the invisible institution, the secret church of the enslaved, gathered out in the brush arbors and the hush harbors in the woods, away from every ear of the master and overseers and the like, where the old ways and the new folded together softly, and our people worshiped as their spirits truly needed to worship. The Congo cosmogram, that's Kogo, got traced quietly in the dirt with a toe. The reverence for the ancestors survived inside the shout and the fire of Black Kim worship. The gods were never really gone, my friends. They were hidden in plain sight while holding breath, waiting. Awaiting, my friend, for a generation, finally free enough and finally awake enough to call them home. And that's what this work is. That is what Melanin Metaphysics places back into your open hands. And I'm not ashamed about what I do at any level, right? The indigenous cosmology of the divine self and of the living, present ancestors and the connected cosmos, the whole way of seeing that they tried so hard to strip away, carried in your blood this entire time and fully available to you right now, today. So when I teach you the black light, when I teach you the radiance path, when I teach you to keep a simple altar and honor the ones who came before you, understand what I'm really doing. I'm not importing something strange and foreign into your life. I'm handing you back your own inheritance. And that is why I cannot speak directly to one African spiritual tradition or another. It's all. And I'm helping the gods come home. Not idols, and never idols, my friends. The truth they always carried, that you are divine. You are divine. And that you are accompanied. And that you belong to something vast. And so I said this is going to be 90 minutes. And I'm almost at. But I have to go into the book. I got to talk about the book for a minute, because when I read about this, it just blew my mind. So, in the year 1807, thereabouts in London, they printed a Bible, right? But it was not the Bible I mean, as what is it? The King James Version, right? It was a specially made edition. And its own title tells you a lot. It was called Parts of the Holy Bible Selected for the Use of Negro Slaves, right? Parts selected. Somebody sat down and selected. And it's interesting because if it's the word of God, if it is actually the word of God, how can anything be selected out of it? That's how we know the Bible's not the word of God, because they could take things out and rearrange them. Okay? And it was made to be handed to the enslaved out on the islands in British West Indian islands by missionaries as part of what they called, as part of their instruction. So I'm going to tell you what they did. They took the Holy Scriptures and they cut them. And this was not a light edit. They removed the overwhelming majority of the Old Testament, right? And they roughly cut half of the New Testament. It was surgery that they did on the Bible. It was precise and it was strategic. They cut out the book of Exodus, right? The deliverance, the whole thundering story of God who hears the groaning of an enslaved people and comes down and shatters the powers of Pharaoh and leads his people up out of the house of bondage and into freedom. They could not possibly allow slaves to hear that part. They cut the verse that says, there is neither bond nor free, that all are one, because they could not allow slaves to read that either, okay? They cut the great visions of justice and revelations at the end of the book, where the mighty are pulled down from their thrones. And do you know what they made sure to keep? All right. And to be preached, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters. They keep every word of the obedience in the Bible, and they cut out all of the freedom. This is the most devious, sick mind you could ever think of. They took the living word of God, which many still believe, and they performed an operation on it to remove every trace of liberation and to leave behind nothing but submission. That is so deep. That is so deep. And that book is not the Bible, right? That book is a confession. It is the enslaver telling on himself in ink, admitting for all of history to see that he knew that the real and whole word of God was the single most dangerous thing he could ever place in the hands of people he's trying to hold down. I'm talking about the real and whole word of God. That is understood, because the real and whole word of God it just doesn't make any sense, right? That the enslavers didn't want that the slaves to get the word of God that they used for themselves. It was not real and it was not whole, but they didn't want them to get that Bible that they used. Okay. Didn't want them to get that, because the truth of it, my friend, the unedited word that Caucasians used sets itself up to be liberating, right? It is full to overflowing with a God who despises bondage, even though the Bible itself is a form of bondage, and the full of the equal, infinite, and unkillable dignity of every single soul, as the Bible discusses it. An enslaver handing the whole Bible to the enslaved is an enslaver handing them the very story that brings the whole house down. I mean, and they knew this stuff. They understood what it would do. So they took out the scissors and they cut it up. They cut the freedom out of the Bible. right? And so it's hard to take liberation out of people. And so our ancestors took the very book that was handed to them as a chain, right? And they reached into it and found freedom in it anyway. And I cannot fully explain to you how, except to call it what it was, which is sacred. Somehow, even with Exodus, like, cut the hell up, my friends. Clean out the pages, our people heard it. They found Moses. They made him go down, Moses. They made, I just messed that up. They made him theirs. Out of the fields and down in the hush harbors, they began to sing, "Go down, Moses. Way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh to let my people go." And it's a house song that I can get down. Oh, I love that song. Mm, mm, mm. It's got the drums in it. That's one of the songs I use to summon. I dance that song in a circle and use it for ritual and to summon because there's so much power in that song. Do you understand what that is? They were singing the exact story that had been cut out of their Bibles, right? They were singing it back into existence with their mouths, their voice, and their breath. They built the spirituals, a whole secret theology of freedom, coded and carried it in song. That's wild, right past the ears of the people who thought they got rid of it, right? They had a church out in the brush. And out of all that, over long and bloody years, they built the Black church. And as soon as they got that dang church, they just got the white man's Bible. It's such a sad story. I mean, it's been a healing part of Black folks ever since. And the beating heart and the organizing engine of every single freedom movement this people has ever raised, from abolition to the Underground Railroad to the marching of the civil rights movement. They took the master's tool and they turned it into a freedom song. There's a book by some gentleman called Burn the Master's House Down. That's the problem. We took the master's tools and we believed that we could change them. The Constitution is a tool. The Bible's a tool. Their church is a tool. And we thought we could make them our own, and somehow that would do something for us. We could fix them. We could amend them. You can't take the master's tools and think you could change them. You have to get rid of the tools absolutely, unequivocally, completely, and build something new. Look, I don't have no quarrel with people's faith, period. And what I do is practice, not religion. All right? And I was a holy roller, my friends. The ancestors who were handed a censored gospel and were so spiritually powerful, so awake, that they found the whole living white God. But I would say they found the whole living divine that they knew inside half a book they were allowed. That's genius. And that's the same power we've been tracing this whole time, showing up one more time. And here is the melanin metaphysics of it, the Kim. The word is vibration too. Our ancestors knew that. The Dogon people speak of Namo, the generative power of the spoken word, the power that actually brings things into being. The Yoruba speak of Ashe, the force that makes a thing so, because you have the breath and the will to speak it. Our ancestors understood deep in their traditions that the word in the mouth is power, power of creation that can shape the world. And so the enslaver could edit out all the pages they wanted to, right? But he could never, ever edit the power of the word in our mouths, right? Because The real word is always in the breath. And when I teach you to call names of your ancestors out loud into a quiet room or quiet space or in union with others, when I teach you that, you speak your own declaration over your own life. Understand, I'm teaching you the same ancient word power reclaimed and back in the mouth where it belongs. And I'm going to have to finish this later because I have a whole other section. But I think I've been on here for an hour, almost 2 hours. And you know, even as a professor, I could not keep talking. And I would have to give it over to the class. And since, oh, there are 2 people watching. Should I finish? Okay. Look, I'm going to set the history down for a minute and I'm going to finish. Okay. I wrote this because people wanted to hear this. Okay. So I'm just going to finish. Right. Because I've walked you through a great deal today. And I'd be failing as a minister if I did not stop and tell you the truth about what all this actually did to us, not to a textbook, to us, to our heart, to your heart and to mine. Because these are not just simple events, my friends, that happened long ago to other people in another century, which so many of our folks believe. Our children, young folks. They left a wound. And a wound that gets handed down generation to generation in the body, in the spirit. Most of us are carrying pieces of it without ever once being told what it is and where it came from. And some of us lived the wound, right? When you think about religion, oh, okay, I'm not going to go there. I got issues. I'm not going to go there. So let me name it now, gently and out loud, so that when you, I don't mean I have issues like I got issues. I'm just saying I have issues with the lies of religion. Okay? So let me name it now, gently out loud, what's happening here. When they took the name, they manufactured the orphan. Okay? And that orphan grows into the deficit story, the low corrosive belief that so many of us carry every day, that we come from nothing, that our line just begins with us, and that we are somehow less rooted, less anchored, less than everyone else who can name their people back a dozen generations. When they banned the drum and exiled the gods, they created a kind of spiritual homelessness in us, a whole people cut off from the cosmology that had told them every single day that they were divine and accompanied and part of a sacred whole. And in the empty place where that used to live, so many of us learned to be ashamed of our own spiritual instincts, to distrust the very knowing that is our birthright. For goodness sake, to reach for the sacred absolutely everywhere except inside our own bodies and our own blood. And underneath all of that, laid down brick by patient brick, with every single theft, was the great lie that the entire machine was built to install, that we are at our very root less than 4 thefts, 1 wound, a people engineered into amnesia. Not just us, but Caucasians too. And then taught to feel small inside the forgetting. And others taught to feel superior inside the forgetting. That, my friends, is the damage. And I need you to know that you are allowed to grieve it, really. If you've ever felt the ache, that rootlessness, that strange homesickness for a home you can't even name, listen, that is not you being weak, and it is not you failing to be spiritual enough. How many times did I go to church and still felt not a part of it? I force fed myself into the church, never feeling comfortable, but believing that's what I had to do. That was how I found stability, peace, and security. But I never felt right. A lot of people have this. That is the real wound. And I kept putting myself back there, forcing it. That's a wound. Scab pulled off every time from a real crime. And it is allowed to hurt. Yes, it hurt me when I left the church. Felt alone. And then as I became more knowledgeable of African spirituality and traditions, it hurt me that I spent so much time under the thumb. But now, some things are supposed to weigh something. And you can't grow without pain. Straight up and down. I ain't talking about physical pain all the time, but there is pain. But I have to tell you the single most important thing I will say in this whole live stream. The reason I have walked you through all of this today is not so that you would know more history. And everybody, and folks hear it that way, right? Please hear me on this. This is not a history lesson. If you leave here today carrying nothing but a few stack of new facts, I have failed you completely. And worse than that, you have missed the entire point of why the ancestors tapped on the glass in the first place. Because what they stole from us were not artifacts to be cataloged. They were spiritual technologies. The name, the drum, the gods, the word. These were the living instruments by which a whole people stayed connected to the divine and to the ancestors and staying to itself, right? And the wound they left behind is not an intellectual wound, although as an academic, there is an intellectual wound. It is a spiritual wound. And a spiritual wound, my friend, cannot be healed with information. It can only be healed by spirit. So I'm going to draw a line as simply, as sharply as I know how, because everything depends on it right now, on this live stream being seen in the framing in which I set it out to be. To know the facts about the drum band is history, but to feel the rhythm actually move in your body and to know it in that moment as the voice of your ancestors still speaking, that is spirituality. To read a paragraph about the Orisha is history. But to stand inside the cosmology of the divine self and the living ancestors and to change how you walk through an ordinary Tuesday, that is spirituality. To learn that they cut Exodus out of the book is history, but to open your mouth in a quiet room and speak the names of your own dead back into the air, that is spirituality. I hope you can see the difference. I hope I've communicated the difference clearly. One is knowledge about the past. The other is power in the present, which can drive spirituality as you move forward. And I'm not here to make you more knowledgeable, my friends. I am here to make you more powerful. That is what Kim metaphysics is, power. That's the heart. And that's the reason I've given my life to this work. Literally, my life. Kim metaphysics, Melanin metaphysics, takes the whole painful history and turns it over in the light and reframes it not as a tragedy for you to study and grieve, my friends, no, but as a sacred inheritance for you to re-embody. Because to remember in the way I'm talking about today is not merely to recall. To remember is to reactivate. Your blood is the archive they could never reach. Your melanin, your Kim, is the antenna they could never quite jam. And remembrance is simply how you reach up and switch that antenna back on. Every single one of these thefts, when you turn it over in your hand, is a map. It is a map of the exact spiritual technology that is yours to recover, my friends. The drum is showing you that your body is a receiver of that sacred frequency. And me saying sacral is not a Freudian slip. The sacral is the root of you. It's the chakra down in your pelvic region, your womb. Receiver of the sacral frequency. The gods are showing up and they're showing you the cosmology of your own divinity. The word, and yeah, I'm having issues saying that. I have to say it. Put in quotes. The word is showing you the power that lives in your spoken breath. This history is not a wound for you to keep soothing. It is an instruction manual for your own power, written for you in a language of everything they tried to take. And that is exactly why I have to tell you, with all the love I have in me, my friends, that this reclamation is not something you can fully do alone, scrolling by yourself at midnight, catching a live stream here and there. This depth of remembrance was never meant to be a solo act. We keep doing the solo because we keep ascribing to Caucasian Western ideology. That's the problem. Especially those of us who have broken off from the church and want something new. We think we can do that new by ourselves. Think about how our ancestors did it. They did not rebuild the faith and the cosmology and the rhythm alone. They could not have. They did it together. They did it together because it was far too heavy and far too sacred to keep alone by yourself. And that, my friend, is what the temple is for. The temple. I've talked about it a lot. But that is the community of folks, right? It is the invisible institution, made visible at last in a time and in a country where we no longer have to hide in the woods to remember who we are. Coming home to the temple is where this remembrance happens in depth. And the ascension powered by Kim metaphysics is nothing more, nothing less than the conscious, joyful, and unashamed recovery that the temple is for. We come home, we come together, we walk it together. All right, so let me leave you the way the ancestors themselves would leave you, by reminding you one more time exactly who you are. You are the name they could not erase. You are the drum they could not silence, my friends. You are the gods they could not banish. You are the word they could not edit. You came from a people who had their sacred name stripped away and who whispered them in the dark anyway, who had a drum outlawed and who simply became the drum, who had their gods condemned as devilry and who hid them so lovingly in the light that they survived until it was safe to bring them home, who were handed a censored, scissored gospel and were sacred enough, awake enough, powerful enough to find the whole living divine intelligence inside and to sing the freedom back. That is your bloodline. That is your inheritance. You did not come from nothing, my friends. You came from the single most unerasable people who have ever walked on the face of this earth. And the living proof of it is that you are sitting right here, right now, feeling all of this stir and rise inside you. which means the flame reached you. After everything, after 400 years of everything, the flame reached you. They did not win. And you are the evidence they did not win. All right? And now, in our time together, the work is remembrance. To remember is to resist. To remember is to reactivate. And you do not have to do it by yourself. You do not. If you don't do it with me in the temple community, then please find a community in which you can embed yourself. All right? Oh man, that was a marathon session, but it had to be had. Thank you for being here. All right? Be blessed. Have a phenomenal evening. Or, yeah, it's evening now. And I will see you back here. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to do another live stream about communicating with and hearing from the ancestors. Yes, I'm getting into a daily schedule here because if this is what I do, I got to dig all the way in for it to be something sustainable for my life. Okay? Thank you, my friends. Have a blessed day. I really, truly appreciate your time being here. Bye-bye.